Hello, everyone. We're going to be starting in a minute, so just going to sit tight. Hi to all our attendees that are saying hi in the chat. It's nice to see that you're here. Thanks for joining us. The rest of our group are going to pop on in the corners in any moment. Hey, Kate.
Hey, how's it going?
Not bad. Hey, John. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. And Jack's finally here with us too. So yes, Michael, recording will be made of this, so your teammates can check it out later. So I'm going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. With conferences being canceled and postponed, we knew we'd be missing those vital connections we make with people in person. Community is very important to us at Shopify, and we really wanted to find a way to connect with you in this virtual space. So we've started this virtual event called Shipit. It's where we can get together and like nerd out over all the things we're working on. And to start off this series, we're talking about release culture at Shopify. My name's Anita Clark, and I'm the managing editor of Shopify's engineering blog. And joining me today is Jack. He's a senior production engineer on the deploys team. Jack, introduce yourself, please.
Hello.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Second is Kate. She's a senior production designer on the production excellence team. Thanks for joining us, Kate.
Hey, thanks, Anita. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And finally, we have John, who's also on the deploys team, and he's a staff production engineer. John, welcome.
Thanks. Hi there.
Awesome. Oh, there's a little doggy in the background. Sorry. We're going to start things off with a short presentation. All the attendees, please ask your questions using the Q&A mode in the chat, and we'll get to those questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. So back when I was in high school, I had this part-time job where I was teaching karate at my local karate school. I was a super excited 16-year-old. I found myself in a room full of 6-year-old white belts. And these kids had just spent their entire days at school. So you can kind of imagine what's going to happen here. I tried super hard to explain and convince the kids to learn what they needed to get to the next level, but they were so much more interested in just running around and screaming. So feeling defeated, I kind of gave up. And I changed my teaching method. I began letting the kids run the classes by telling me what they wanted to do. What if we had structured each class as an action movie where we're running around the whole time finding bad guys? I wanted to, in a way, trick them into learning the curriculum. And it worked. They were learning and having fun. Parents were happy, and I love the challenge of combining what the students want and what I want to create a good experience for everyone. So I realized the trick isn't about getting people to do the right thing, but it's about getting them to do their own thing, just in the right direction. So today we'll be talking about the culture around shipping code at Shopify and how we turn that into what our developers want, into important healthy guiding principles for how we ship code. And just like my karate students, we encourage developers to do their own thing, just in the right direction. So Shopify defines culture as a sum of beliefs and behaviors of everyone at Shopify. And we try to approach culture around releasing software the exact same way. Everybody's experience, opinions, and feedback shape the way that we release code at Shopify. And this means that over time, the way we approach releasing software changes. And this is a good thing. And most importantly, we're always measuring and searching for these changes so that we can stay on top of our users' experiences. We have over 1,000 developers at Shopify working on over 1,000 active repositories. These range from our core monolith to mission-critical infrastructure to small one-off projects. And there are so many thoughts and opinions and experiences around shipping code at Shopify, and it's really hard to make sure that everyone gets heard. And we still want to get better at this, but today, we're going to share some of the strategies that we use to stay connected to our users. And as a tooling team, we also want to make sure that the tooling we build scales for both ends of our spectrum so that the release experience is consistent between our biggest and smallest repos. So regardless of the size of the repo, there's generally some important business goals that comes with release. There are the non-negotiable goals that our team needs to have, the bare essentials that our tooling provides. A few examples are uptime, security, consistency. But what is really interesting is the path that we take to get there. So there are other variables that we can decide to pursue or trade off. Some examples being maybe velocity. Maybe shipping fast is important for you. Or maybe cost. Maybe being able to run your operations at a lower price point is the most important thing. Or maybe autonomy. It might be important for your business that developers can work independently and own their own work. Or maybe their work is more mission critical and you need to follow a more rigorous process. Our culture guides us on which variables we should optimize for and which variables we could trade off as we build tooling to accomplish all of these non-negotiable goals. And this makes our tooling intentionally opinionated to provide the best experience for our developers. And these are the variables that we want to focus and talk about today. We're going to share a few variables that are important to our culture and how they manifest in our release process. But before that, and more importantly, how do you even know what that culture is? And to answer that question, I'm going to pass it to my friend Kate.
Thanks, Jack. So like Jack said, every day at Shopify, we ship thousands of commits on 800 deploys across thousands of repos, ranging from our core monolith to small experimental services. So with that amount of volume, how do we identify patterns and how can we point to something and say, that's the culture? And more than that, how can we define a culture that's our goal that can work for everybody? So when we talk about measuring culture, we're talking about a few different things. How do developers want to work? What's important to them? How do they expect the tools they use to support them? How much do they want to know about what's going on behind the scenes or under the hood of the tools they use? There's not usually one answer to these questions, especially given the number and variety of people who deploy every day at Shopify. But there are a few active and passive ways we can start to get a sense for the culture around shipping code. One of these methods isn't necessarily more important than the others, but all of them together paint a much clearer picture of what life is like for the people that use our tools. So some of the passive methods we use, they really don't require much work from our team except to notice and kind of aggregate the information that comes in. One is the Developer Happiness Survey, which is a biannual survey of developers across the company. Devs are asked to self-report from everything from their satisfaction with the tools they use to where they feel like most of their time is wasted or lost. So we can't really do much to keep them from being distracted by Slack, but we can ensure that they're not wasting time using tools that don't work the way they want to work, at least the tools that we build. So in addition to the Dev Happiness Survey, we also have Slack channels dedicated to shipping and the tools that we build. And these are open to anybody at Shopify, and people can get support from our team or each other and talk about, frustrations they're having, how they're working around things. Our team is pretty active in these channels to help foster that sense of community and encourage devs to share their experiences. But we don't often use these channels to directly ask for feedback because they're big and they move pretty quickly. That said, we do want to be proactive about identifying pain points. And we know we can't just wait around on people to tell us what to build. So there are some things that we do that are much more active to make sure that we're solving the most important problems. So the first is dog fooding. Just like other developers at Shopify, our team ships code every day using the same tools that we build and maintain. And this really helps us identify gaps in our service and empathize with users when things don't go as planned, because sometimes things don't go as planned. Another really valuable research is our internal support team. They take on the huge responsibility of helping users and supporting our ever-evolving suite of internal tools. They diagnose issues and help folks find the right team to direct their questions to, and they're super valuable to us when it comes to identifying common pain points that users experience in current workflows, as well as potential pitfalls in concepts and prototypes. So they're really valuable. We love them. And finally, when it comes to adding new features or changing existing workflows, we do a lot of UX research throughout our process to better understand user behavior and expectations, and to test out concepts and prototypes as we develop them. So we shadow developers as they ship PRs to see what they're looking at and what they're thinking about as they make decisions. We talk to people like designers and copywriters who might not normally ship code at other companies, but they often do at Shopify. And we ask them to walk us through their processes and how they learn to use the tools they rely on. We also talk to interns and new hires and ask them to test out prototypes. And that really helps us get a fresh perspective and challenge some of the assumptions that we're working with. So all these things together really ensures that throughout the process of building and launching, we're getting feedback from real people to make sure we're always making things better. And that kind of gets into something that we say a lot internally, and we really try to embody as a team. So we believe that feedback is a gift, but it doesn't always make it less intimidating for users to share their frustrations, or easier for us to hear when things go wrong, because we don't want to make things that people are struggling with. Our goal with all of our measuring is to create a feedback loop where users feel comfortable talking about what's not working for them, knowing that we care and we'll try to act on it, and where we can feel energized and inspired by what we learn from users instead of disheartened and bitter. We want them to know that their feedback and talking to us is super valuable, and that they can really help us make these tools and culture around shipping supportive of everyone. So now that you know a little bit about how we measure culture around shipping code at Shopify, let's look at the actual release process and how we're looking to improve it. And I'm going to hand it back to Jack.
Thanks, Kate. Cool. So let's look at the release process at Shopify. So this is the happy path of what the release looks like. So pull requests are a unit of work at Shopify, and developers start the process of shipping by issuing a /shipit command on their pull request. From here, the merge queue system tries to integrate the pull request into our trunk branch master. And when the merge gets determined that the changes could be integrated successfully, the pull request is merged into our master branch and deployed to our Canary infrastructure. In our Canary environment, it's a subset of production that receives a random 5% of all incoming requests. And this allows developers to test their changes in a realistic environment with real production data. The Canary gets soaked for around 10 minutes, where developers have the tooling to be able to test their changes in the Canary environment. And if there's no manual intervention and the automated Canary analysis does not trigger any alerts, the changes are then automatically deployed to production. And throughout this process, it was non-negotiable that the changes are put through the process safely, securely, and consistently. But the first variable we decided to optimize for was trust. Developers want to be trusted at Shopify and have autonomy over their work. And so trust is a big part of working at Shopify. And we want to give our developers a lot of freedom in how they want to work. And in return, we expect them to be responsible. So back to the release process. Developers own the whole process here, which means there's no release managers, sign-offs, or windows that developers are allowed to make releases in. Unfortunately, this means that things will break, and that's okay. We have built our infrastructure to be able to limit the blast radius of bad changes. And we trust that each of our developers to be responsible and own the recovery if the change goes bad. So once a fix has been paired, either through a fix forward or a revert, developers can fast track their fix to the front lines with a single /shipit-emergency command. And one choice we made was that we didn't bother with having multiple recovery protocols. And instead, we just have a single emergency feature that takes the quickest path to recovery. This very small opinionated detail forces us to think simpler about our tooling, which helps make it easier to do the right thing in high-pressure situations. And we try to split the details here. And this is just one example on how we try to be thoughtful in interactions to make it very easy to be autonomous. And the next variable that's important to us is velocity. So the short of it is that developers want to ship fast. And speed of release is a crucial element to most apps at Shopify. It's a big productivity boost for developers to be able to ship their code multiple times a day and to have it reach end users immediately. But more importantly, having a quick release process allows us to also have a quick path to recovery. So as mentioned before, when things break, we typically need to either revert something or fix forward. In either case, we have to send the change out to the front lines. And we really want to make this fast. So we're very happy to throw flaming jets on fire trucks while they wheelie to the front lines. And it can be expensive. Our core monolith runs over 140,000 tests on every single pull request. So to make this process fast, we've invested in very high amounts of parallelism. And we run over 25,000 CI workers at our daily peak. We've also traded off a bit of safety for this. So recently, we've been running subsets of the test suite on changes rather than the whole suite on every change. And we're very happy to throw these jets on our regular changes as well, because we like things fast, and we also like automation. So developers don't want to perform repetitive tasks. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. We use automation a lot in our release process for speed, but there's also some very interesting effects that automation can bring. So one interesting piece of automation that we use is that we automated out the need for developers to press the deploy button. We automatically and continuously deploy from master to canary and canary to production. And this helps us ensure that our environments are consistent and they converge with each other automatically. We're also very opinionated about developers being able to override the automation. So in some cases, developers can actually lock this process and deploy manually in things like emergencies. And after the blockage is removed, we can re-enable the continuous deployment and have regular operation again. And this automation seems really simple, but prior to this, we noticed that people often left things undeployed on master because they forgot to press the deploy button. So all we really did was eliminate the need for a button press, but this actually added a really healthy amount of chaos into the system. Once people started the shipping process, they expected to progress through it, and they expected it to go through fast. So when things are broken and velocity is affected, it's suddenly all hands on deck. People would feel personally burdened by the decrease in velocity, and they would all work together to get things back to normal. So we don't really have any magic sauce that makes our tooling or process or culture any better or worse than anyone else's. And our solutions probably won't even work in a lot of organizations. But that's okay, because we've learned what works for us. We built tooling that makes shipping code at Shopify fun and satisfying. And so we hope that we encourage everyone today to think about your own cultures and to find or build tooling that reflects the values of the most important people, the people who work with you. And with that, I think we're going to go into our Q&A section. So I'm going to hand it back to Anita.
Thank you, Jack and Kate, for that great presentation. We're going to start with our Q&A. And our first question is from Jennifer. What challenges has your team faced with what has been built so far? You want to start that off, Jack?
Sorry, my thing was muted. Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
The internet. What challenges has your team faced with what has been built so far?
Yeah, I think I think that we have a lot of challenges, but the biggest one that comes to mind right now is just like, we make assumptions when we build our tooling based on feedback and everything we can gather, but there's always a chance that the things we build does not actually improve the situation, and sometimes could even make things worse. And so we have to make these bets and accept that a lot of the times we're going to make decisions and they're going to be wrong, and learn from it. So some recent examples could be, recently we made a change to cancellation out of the shipping process, where we decide that if you're too close to, making it out to Canary, that you can no longer cancel. And it was a change that we made to optimize the process and make sure that we don't have too many people removing and disrupting the process. And when we made it, it was very unclear if this was actually going to be something that helped or did it make things worse. And so, we had to just kind of make the bet, communicate, and gather feedback. And so far, I think it's been positive, but it was, it's very on the line, and it could have easily gone the other way. Kate, John, do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think something that would maybe have been nice to touch on in the presentation that I didn't even think of until just now is, we talk about Shopify as kind of a unit, but every team also has their own shipping culture. Like they have a different way to onboard people we have Shopify onboarding, but every team also has their own kind of way of bringing people in. And so a lot of the variations in how people kind of approach shipping, it also depends on the team you're on. So we don't have one culture to rule them all necessarily. And I think that's good and bad. There's definitely trade-offs with that. But I think when you said we're making assumptions, we're also making assumptions about kind of what works well for most people. And that means that some people are going to be frustrated, or some people are going to change the way that they approach shipping because of the changes that we're making. So we always try to get that 80-20 split of fixing things that work for most people.
Jonathan?
There's also an aspect of keeping up with our existing infrastructure versus supporting all the new stuff that we're building all the time. The rate of change at Shopify is very fast. And we have a lot of changes obviously happening around our big applications that we've been supporting in the past, but then there's a huge number of new applications and new types of applications coming online all the time. It's hard to keep up with all the different use cases and whatnot that comes up with that.
Great, thank you guys. Our next question, and I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Eyal. Can you share more details around the internal support team? At what point did it organizationally make sense to build a dedicated internal support team for tooling? I guess, Kate, you should take this one to start.
That's a good question. I don't think I have very much context on that because they existed before I joined, but we don't have a huge internal support team for the tools that, production engineering builds, but we have a few people who, work kind of at least Eastern 9 to 5 hour. Well, I don't know. Some people are across are in different time zones, but they're not full coverage support. But they kind of help when things go real bad. And in general, they help us work on documentation. They help us work on a lot of the research to kind of identify what people know and what people are struggling with, and kind of help us find that next hot project to work on. I think that the team is growing a bit because we're realizing that there's a lot of benefit in having people that know our internal tools really well. And especially as Shopify kind of gets bigger and more complex, our tooling does too a little bit, and figuring out how to support, everybody's kind of differing needs, and figuring out how much support people need on different tools. That's kind of been a really nice thing to have that internal team, but I'm not sure that much about the strategy of hiring them or anything. I was not involved.
Do any of you guys have any insights to that?
I've been at Shopify for almost 4 years. Our internal support teams have been around for longer than that even. I would say in general, it makes sense to start beefing up internal support teams and tooling teams earlier rather than later. One of the things that we really benefit from at Shopify is being able to 10x our developers by building better tools for them. And we unlock possibilities that just weren't there before. So the more time that you can dedicate towards that, the better the end result, generally speaking, for the whole developer community within the company.
Yeah, I also think that like there's, even before we had a kind of really robust internal support team, like I'm thinking of like Jenna and Ben, like they, we still have this culture of people helping each other. So even if the, support's not online, even if they're busy helping somebody else, there is still this really like active culture of helping one another. So it can sometimes get busy with lots of cooks in the kitchen, but it is all coming from a really nice place.
Yeah, definitely. I think historically, like we've invested a lot in our tooling, like very, very early on. And I think that was one thing that actually like kind of helped bring Shopify to where it is today. Just the optimization on being able to like ship quickly, and like, even investing in Ruby on Rails as like a framework and language, right? Like we optimize for like development speed. And then over time, like, over a span of 10 years, if you have a higher speed of development, like, you just naturally have a quicker pace. And then, as you scale, become a bigger company, that velocity carries forward, right? And you're always chasing, you're trying to maintain that bar of velocity. And it's so much easier to keep things fast rather than make things fast. So I think those investments have really like helped.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Mark, and he wants to know when code reviews happen.
I can maybe start with that. So yeah, we kind of skimmed over that through the release process. Generally, what happens is the code review process happens on the pull request before any of the release stuff actually happens. So once a review is done, that's when the shipping process starts. So they're like two kind of separate processes. And I think like for us, like most teams have their own like cultures and norms around how they want to do code reviews. Some teams, want like at least 2 reviewers. Some are okay with 1. Some teams, expect reviews in like a day. Some teams are a little bit more, forgiving on time. So yeah, every team has their own like little subcultures around that, I think.
Anyone else want to add to this question?
No, it's pretty straightforward. I just see that there's another question about QA and when that happens in the release. I'm wondering if we should go to that next.
Yeah, I was going to say Jonathan's question kind of like is very related to this previous one. So Jonathan asked, where does QA take place in our release pipeline?
Right. I can answer that. I think it's relatively well known that we don't have a dedicated QA team at Shopify, so there's no particular set of people that are doing QA. In general, again, this is team specific and kind of culture of the team specific. QA, or top hatting as we like to call it, is something that happens iteratively and throughout the process of developing, usually or ideally with someone who's reviewing your code rather than the person who's writing it. And then our Canary release process is another area where QA, but in production, typically happens. So there's a window of time that developers have available to them to go to the Canary environment, view their code running in production, interact with it, and we'll also, as Jack mentioned earlier, expose that to real merchants and buyers as well. So there's a few different points where it happens. I think I'm counting them all. Jack, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it's about right, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jack.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I just want to add on to that too. Like, like I think every single process that happens in the release, in a way, like affords you a certain amount of confidence. So, for example, like when you run CI on a change, you might have like an 85% confidence interval that like your change is going to go out there and not break. Same with QA, right? When you have someone manually test it, you might have like a 95% confidence rate that your thing will be fine. And Canary affords us the same thing, right? With Canary, like we get a certain amount of confidence in the change that it's going to be fine when it's production. And I think it really comes down to like what signals you want to invest in and focus on. So like we've invested in CI being like our automated like QA sort of thing to help developers. But the main signal that we care a lot about is the canary signal. So what happens when your change actually hits production? And generally, I think that is the signal that we place the most value on. So if we can get your change there the quickest and get that, like, did it blow up? Yes, no. In our opinion, that is the best quality signal we can give you about if your change is, good or not. So we try to optimize heavily in that process, and if we have to trade off other parts of the process to make that happen faster, we're willing to do that.
Okay, Jack, actually this question by Christian kind of segues into canaries, so I'm going to start with you for this one. So how long will a code change run in Canary until considered safe and deployed to production?
So right now our soak period is, I think, 10 minutes, though we can change that like sort of on the fly. It's a little bit arbitrary, but it's a good balance for us between like safety and stability, or sorry, safety and velocity, where like, it's enough of a window that like developers will be alerted and they can go ahead and essentially QA their own changes. And then, the automatic monitoring would tell us if anything big blows up. And so far this process has worked, but we kind of built it with the idea that we can always shorten or lengthen the time based on if we need more velocity or do we need more safety.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Okay. I think right now it's a pretty like manual, it's not pretty manual, but like right now we have, like Jack said, like there's CI to kind of tell us what is going on. But as we add more signals to that, or as we decide like what to prioritize, I think it's interesting to have the flexibility to change that time, because if people want to, and like maybe on different repos we have different options, but I think it's nice to have kind of a decision made for Shopify core.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, and it's from Jonathan. How is the team confident that testing a subset will be enough? What's the test coverage or goal coverage of the codebase/repo?
Oops,
Oh, Jack?
Do you have any numbers around this?
I do not have any exact numbers. So generally our test coverage is pretty good. So the reason why we're okay running a subset of tests is because you can think of it as like, how much does each successive test you run afford you in terms of like confidence, right? So the first test you run might give you like 50% confidence your code is fine. And then you write a second test and it might be like 75%. And then you write a third test and it's like 78%. The point is that like every additional test you run actually gives you a smaller marginal amount of actual like confidence in the code that it's successful. So if we can find the right balance of how many tests to run, we can reduce the amount of time that it takes for a change to go out. And if we can reduce the amount of time it takes for a change to go out, then what we can do is we can optimize for that canary signal, where it's okay if it breaks, because we've made it so that like we expect changes to break from now and then. But by making the process shorter and faster, we can just recover faster. So we can spend an hour running tests and make sure that every case is covered. But what's more important to us is let's spend 15 minutes running those tests, get the change out in 5 minutes, and if it breaks, that's fine. We can recover extremely quickly. And we find that to be extremely valuable. And so we're willing to trade off a bit of safety for that, because we understand that even if we run our entire test suite and we have 100% test coverage, we're still going to break things. So we might as well, get a reasonable amount of safety, but just break things. It's fine. And just create an environment where things can break and it's okay. And it won't cause big problems for the infrastructure and for our merchants.
Anything else
I think the
to
other
add?
thing worth mentioning. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to ask if you wanted anything else to add.
Yeah, I think the other thing worth mentioning is just that the team that's building that out is spending some time actively monitoring tests as they fail. So they've set up some automated tooling to keep an eye on master builds and to be able to look into any builds that seemingly pass without any real reason to have passed. So there's still like a lot of manual work looking into some builds and making sure that they are working as we expect. But over time, we've gotten more confident in the automated results of that.
I think this is one of the like things that I've seen the most, like the confidence in shipping something in general, especially with this kind of like, it's not fast and loose because we thought about it a lot and we work really hard on it, but this kind of like, it's not so solidly secure. And this is something that I've seen a lot of variation on in how teams kind of manage their new hires onboarding. So a lot of teams will just have somebody make something and ship it as fast as possible. And if it fails, that's cool. Your first experience is failing, and that's like something that we all need to be comfortable with. And other people, really want to make sure that the first PR somebody deploys is like really solid and really like rock stable. And so I think it's interesting talking about what does either lengthening the amount of testing or shortening it with that canary kind of fail safe due to someone's perception of how risky shipping is. I think there's something really interesting there in making people try to feel confident, but also making sure that people are, doing due diligence to test things on canaries. And that's kind of where they need to put their attention more so than, just babysitting their merge as it goes through.
Yeah, and just something else I want to add is like Netflix has their like chaos monkeys that go ahead and break things in production. In a way, our deploys are our chaos monkeys. There are things that go out and break things in production all the time, and so like it is a way of forcing resiliency on ourselves as well.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Barrett, and he asks, how do you measure consistency?
I think I said I'll take this one.
Yep.
So I skimmed over consistency a little bit, but the reason why consistency is, well, first of all, what it is that I mentioned consistency in the context that environments should be consistent. Specifically, what we try to optimize for is if your change is on master, it should be on canary and should be in production. It should be easy to reason about the state of the system. So it's a hard one to measure because in any like sort of deployed system, it's an eventual consistency because deployments aren't instant. Code doesn't come out instantly. In fact, we have artificial delays like in the canary process to stop that. So it's a hard one to measure, but I think the important thing for consistency is visibility. So how do you know what change is actually deployed at what time? And this is something that we're still investing in today. Like we have some visibility, like we'll say like these are the things that are deployed, but it's not like perfect. And so like, right now we're actually like, working on a project to be able to better surface, what is the exact state of production, what is the exact state of canaries, and what exactly are we waiting for on master that still needs to be deployed. So I think it's for us, we care more about the visibility of consistency rather than the actual like consistency itself. But at the same time though, it's like if something says it's deployed, it should probably be deployed and not like 50-50 still. So that comes down to like infrastructure monitoring, and we have like dashboards and stuff like that. So that is kind of one way we're seeing it.
I think it's also about the language that we use. Like, I mean, I know this probably wasn't the intent of the original question, but consistency in the way that we talk about statuses and states is really important. And so, like, if we say that something is deployed in one tool or one part of the tool, and then we say it's waiting for deployed or deploying, or something else in another part of the tool, that's really going to throw people off and make them lose confidence. So, just being consistent about and like deliberate about the language that we're using is also, I think, really critical to making people feel confident using this tool.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jennifer, and she's asking if there's a trade-off between velocity and autonomy. Do you want to start with that, Jack?
Yeah, I think there's a simultaneous pairing, and like they're kind of at ends of each other a little bit too. I think like autonomy affords us a lot of velocity because it means that people can be independent and they can be fast without like, a central system, telling them they can't do something or they have to wait or something. At the same time, the autonomy also impedes a lot of velocity because there needs to be like synchronization checkpoints, right, to make sure that everyone can be autonomous and at the same time. So yeah, the balance there I think is tricky. I think the more important thing for us, rather than trying to optimize those variables independently, is to figure out like what is the exact thing we want to achieve. Like one way I try to look at autonomy is that autonomy actually creates chaos in a way because it adds unpredictability to like a system. And so like, can we create chaos that forces people to be more responsible, or to like, force people to be like faster, right? Like I think the example around automating the deployments from master to canary to production is an example of that, where we kind of like created an automation and that incentivizes people for a faster process and incentivizes people to be more alert. And that's the kind of chaos we want to create with automation. So I think there's like, an interesting pairing there between like automation and velocity.
Anyone else
I
want
think in
to
general, yeah, the more autonomy you take away from people, the often more velocity you can get out of a system. So we're very far from the end of the spectrum where any developer can decide how they want to deploy to production and do it however they want. They may be faster that way after a while of learning how to do their own deploys, but it won't be good overall for the entire company. So in general, we do allow people to kind of dip into the deploy system and understand the state of deploys and even control them for their service. But we really try and keep them on the happy path and make sure that they're doing the right thing. So, yeah, I don't know if that's answering the question, but there's definitely a kind of like level of autonomy that we are taking away in pursuit of speeding things up for everybody else.
I think that's also where the measuring kind of comes into play. Like people do have a chance to some degree, influence what we build and how we decide we want to move forward. Like we don't want to dictate everything to them, but yeah, Jonathan's right that we are going to build tools and people are going to use them because that's work. But I think one of the nice things to keep in mind is that there are a lot of channels for communication, or at least we hope there are. And we really do want people to talk to us about what's working and what's not working, so that we can make sure that, we're never making things worse and we're only improving things. And, what things people value in the process now. If they value more autonomy, if they value more velocity, I'm sure most people would say they want both, but, we can kind of work together to figure out where on that spectrum we want to sit.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question is from Kaylin, and they ask, with so many deployments in a day, how does Shopify make sure the end user is in sync with the new version of production? Is there any downtime to the end user when the code changes are made?
There's another question here I think was similar to that, so I'll try to answer both. I think there's some other question around how do we like release things through like feature flags. I think the example is like launch darkly was in the question. So yeah, we have our own sort of release flags. We call them beta flags. And so I think that's similar to what this question is asking. So generally what happens is deployments have code changes, but we encourage our team to think about releases separately from deployments, so that if you are releasing a feature, like do so using beta flags. So basically what they are is you can turn them on either on a per shop basis, or you can turn them on for a percentage of shops. And then what happens is that like when you turn them on, that means that shop has that flag on, so it's consistent. So that's kind of our like way of sort of like optimizing through this scenario where like Canary and production could be running different versions and things might look different. So by forcing or encouraging people to use beta flags, they can go ahead and roll out a change like instantaneously, right? So when they flip the flag, this store now has, you know, a new color and a new button that does a new thing. So yeah, there is an element of risk in that too, that like, you know, you can be deploying things for like weeks and then you turn it on and it's broken. But the benefit there is that these flags are easily turned off. So if there are problems, then, you know, people can turn it off right away as well.
Great,
I
thanks.
think it's worth. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just that I'm struggling to even think of a change that went out deliberately that incurred downtime. We don't do this. We don't typically allow code to get out and have it cause downtime. It's not even something that we like explicitly state in our principles. It's just something that's not tenable for us to take the merchant experience down for them.
Awesome. Okay, we have another question from Jay. What is the user experience around mistyping /shipit and /shipit -- emergence commands? And do you plan on expanding the list of commands supported?
I can go. The way that works right now is with GitHub comments. So most developers are making a change using a PR, a pull request in GitHub. And when they're ready to deploy, when they have all the reviews and CI passing that they need, they can just type a comment that's /shipit. And if for some reason they need to emergency merge that PR, so the normal command will just send their PR to a queue. We'll run some tests and validations on that, and then ensure that it's ready to go. And if it is ready to go, then we'll start the process of deploying it. But for the case where there's some problem that you want to get out quickly, we have the emergency command. We've talked about other types of commands that we might support, like a soft emergency one that won't completely destroy the queue, but would allow folks to ship things in a kind of priority lane. But in general, we don't really think it's super valuable to have kind of multiple decision trees or paths that a user has to take to figure out how to get their change out. It's better for us to own that process for them, and they just give us some indicators of how they want it done. So as fast as possible, or just like the normal way. The only changes that we're looking to making to that are potentially moving it out to out of the PR and into like a local Shipit experience that people can interact with in some sort of mobile app or web browser or something like that. Just because it's hard to keep all of the context around shipping a PR within GitHub. It can be difficult.
Yeah, I think like the question asked about like misspellings. And so people are kind of waiting for that immediate feedback. When they type the shipit command, they get immediate feedback on GitHub. And so if they don't, if they forget the P or something, then yeah, they're not going to see that. So it's a pretty immediate, cycle. They don't have to wait and wonder if they typed it in right.
Okay, thank you. Fernando, I hope we answered your question regarding the use of controlling the release of features. If not, just hop back in the chat and we'll try and answer that for you. We're going to move on to Gurkan's question. When you're testing the subset of a code base, especially with Ruby and Rails, how do you decide which tests need to be run?
Yeah, the team, fortunately, who works on that is not here today. But so I can say a little bit, but they know way more than I do. Basically, the gist of it is that there is a specific pipeline that we have that runs when code is merged to master. And what it does is that it generates a mapping of which lines of code map to which files. So depending on what code changes, it's able to know which test to run. Of course, there are some files, for example, like tests around like routes and like schemas that will run on every single change because it's hard to create that mapping. But generally, this gives us a certain amount of ability to select tests based on the diffs.
Great, thanks. Do any of you guys have any insights also that you can add to that question? Considering the person who's a specialist is not here. Okay, let's move on. So the next one, oh my God, Ashfaq. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. How do you do end-to-end testing considering a scaled agile environment?
We don't always test in production, but when we do, yeah, I mean it's an interesting question because we've I think our company does a lot less of this than what a lot of other companies do, mostly because we're very monolithic in architecture. So most of our code runs in one gigantic monolith. So our end-to-end testing in terms of like service integration testing, I think that's what this question is asking, is not as heavy. But we do have some flows where let's say there's a very sensitive flow. A good example is checkout. I believe what we have is that we have like automated browser tests to be able to make sure that those work correctly and look right. And I believe those ones do run on every single change that we ship. So those are some kind of end-to-end testing we do. And we do have some integration tests, mostly around making sure that the APIs adhere to the right standard. But generally, in terms of like cross-service integration testing, we don't really do any of that.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Jon.
To add on, we have a tool that we use internally that we have an open source for running load tests. So we, as Jack said, typically don't do end-to-end testing as part of the CI/CD pipeline. That's just not, unless a developer has set up some end-to-end test that doesn't kind of run naturally. But testing in production is something we do a lot more of, and particularly load testing. So making sure that we can scale to the levels that we need to across our system is something that's happening every single day, and taking things down sometimes, which is fun to deal with.
Great. Our next question is from Arvin. In cultivating your company culture, are there any books or learning resources you require your developers or employees to read and learn?
Definitely not require, but a book we talk a lot about internally is the book Anti-Fragile. And I think that's kind of how we try to build systems as well. And there's a lot of things, like we also talk about radical candor. We also talk about, it's all kind of about building a culture where when things go wrong, you don't necessarily blame a person, you fix it and then try to figure out how to, not have it happen in the future. And I think that is maybe more important than any particular book or blog or anything like that. I think it's really more about creating a culture that wants to work together more than, have a really rigid hierarchy or have people who are, super in charge of any one piece. And I think that really helps, the culture, build that right culture.
Great. Our next question is from Jennifer, and she's asking, what's next for shipping and deploys at Shopify? Jonathan, you want to start this off?
Yeah.
We're working on a few different things right now. The big thing that we've been focusing on is revamping the experience of Shipit, which is our open source shipping pipeline tool. That's getting a bit long around the teeth, and we want to make it better for our developers at Shopify. So we've been working on a mobile-friendly experience that includes some of the more features that we built more recently, the merge queue and canary environments. So that's something that's been ongoing, and we're continuing to work on. We've been looking at other features that we could build as well. One thing that we've been considering is being able to test code on a Canary environment before it actually gets merged or shipped to production, merged to master or shipped to production. And the benefit there would be for our developers to be able to test code in a real production-like environment without, and potentially multiple times, without having to kind of like excise their change from Canary if something goes wrong. They have a lot more guardrails helping them out. And then another thing that I've been kind of personally keen on is improving our Canary analysis. So we have some automated tools for detecting problematic changes in our Canary environments and our environments in general, but they could be a lot more robust in my opinion. And it would be great if we could integrate those into Shipit so you could both see what Canary is analyzing for you and maybe even configure that more deeply. I'd love that.
Jack, Kate, any you want to share some tidbits with the crowd?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jonathan started to talk about it a little bit, like giving people more context about what's happening and like helping them make the right decision. Like we have a lot of tools that we use internally, and so trying to think of, you know, what's helpful to somebody either before they decide to ship, as they're waiting for their code to ship, or while they're kind of checking to see if everything's okay. What information is helpful to them to know that they're making the right choice and feel like now is a good time. And also like for smaller pieces that people are running on their own, or for like that teams are running, how can they make sure that they're making the right decisions like on a larger scale? So somebody is probably, you know, no one person is changing Shopify as a product, but there are a lot of smaller services that people have a lot more control over individually. So how they run those services, I think, is really interesting. And then, yeah, like Siri integration. No, I'm kidding. But maybe, I mean, who knows?
Jack, any future things you can share? Oh, you've just disappeared.
Jack was so disgusted by my joke about Siri.
I keep pressing the wrong button. I tried to like unmute myself. I turned off my webcam. Yeah, it's gonna happen with Siri too. You know, like Siri, please ship my pull requests. All right, deleting production. But yeah, I mean, yeah, like it's interesting because I think like, you know, we have to constantly reevaluate the things that we do based on the changes in the company, right? Like, you know, tomorrow it might be that like, you know, we decide, hey, you know what, like shipping fast isn't important anymore. We need to be safer. And it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, we have to rethink our process. So it's, yeah, I mean, definitely like, you know, everything what Kate and John talked about definitely are probably the things top of mind. I don't think I have too much to add to that. Just like, you know, we always want to try to get better at, you know, staying on top of the trends and the feelings of our developers, and making sure that, you know, we continue to invest in the right direction, because you know, the tooling we build takes time to build, and so we want to make sure that by the time it's done, it's not like out of date. So yeah, just investing in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack, Kate, and John. We have 3 minutes left before this is done. We're going to cut this off at 2 because, you know, guys might have meetings or whatever. We might have meetings after this. I have no idea. I know I don't. But I want to thank you, Jack, John, and Kate, for being here and sharing all your knowledge. There's going to be a webinar, a copy of this. It's not a webinar, it's a virtual event. There'll be a copy of this. It'll be on the Release Culture at Shopify blog post. So look for that when it's available. I'll also tweet it out on Shopify Eng that the video is up. So follow us on Twitter. We're also hiring. So please remember to check out our careers. You can also check out how we're dealing with hiring in this time of COVID also. Thank you all of you guys that have showed up to spend this hour with us. We honestly didn't expect this many people, and we really enjoyed all your questions. There's still a bunch of questions left over that we hopefully will get answered and share with you externally so you can all view them. And We'll also be sending in a survey out to you attendees. We want to know how we can make this better, what you guys really liked, and what topics you'd love to see for upcoming events. So again, thank you. Have a great Monday. It's 4:20. Do what you need to do. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. It is 4:20.